are doing?
Good.
Good. You're really cold, Tammy.
Yeah.
Isn't this miserable outside?
Yeah, it's so cold.
She gets me. It's miserable. Are you also really cold? I don't like this. No, I don't like it at all. Mm-mm. Do we have, before we start, prayer requests? Very good. Everyone has their computers. Such a beautiful class. Did you guys have a chance now, since you're just in Einstein's and just doing some readings, did you guys have a chance to do any digging into the foreign policy of our country? Is that yes? Yes, yes. Yeah, all right. Let's see. Tell me what you have got. I mean, I've done some digging. I've read through this. So, and I found some interesting things. I found some things that make me really happy. But I want to hear, before we compare notes, I want to see what you guys have got, and then we'll all be on the same page. All right, so let's start. Sujin, what have you got?
I honestly have been looking at like recent foreign policy that's
Okay.
changing.
Okay.
I looked at all the sites that you sent us. I really couldn't find anything from there, but I actually found Latvia's news directly from their news.
Nice.
And I found that one of the things that I found is that there was an article about how Latvia actually agreed that the UK's withdrawal from Brexit, and this is gonna actually benefit Latvia. But I was wondering how this is gonna influence the relationship between Latvia and the UK.
So Brexit was a common topic. I'm going to put it in here. Brexit. What else? So that was the main thing you found?
Yes.
Jack?
I just found stuff talking about how as soon as they got independence from the Soviet Union, they pursued relationships with the countries to the west. So that involves like them pursuing NATO membership and becoming a member of the European Union.
Okay, that's very good. Ron? Ron, deaf, right? Very intelligent? Don't hear well? Speak up.
They also have like bilateral agreements with the regional countries, like in the Baltics mostly, and Scandinavia. And then they also have bilateral agreements with China and other regions.
All right, so we have relations with Baltic countries. We have bilateral agreements. Let me explain what those are. And we also have multilateralism. That's a term. Tammy.
What I saw was the relationship with Russia and how they're currently trying to improve it because they haven't like had the best relationship.
So Russia is going to be a topic. Sam.
Continuing, like they have like pursued like better relationships with Russia, but at the same time they're also like reprimanding Russia for what they've done in Ukraine, and so after they kind of like reprimanded what Russia did in Ukraine, like they gained like more support from NATO and more like military support and stuff like that.
Okay. Hyken.
Certain with foreign policies and issues their improving of the Russian relations.
Improving their relations
Yeah, between Latvia and Russia.
in Russia. Katie.
I spent most of my time looking at the relation with Russia, and that I found a lot of articles about how there is this tension between like the languages, since there are so many Russians in Latvia. But even though there's this tension, I kept finding that Russia was still the #1 exporting country and importing country. So economically, they're still fine. So that's interesting.
Lots of economic relations with
Right.
Russia. Oh yeah, I knew I was forgetting something. There's this book I want to check. Okay, once I double check it, I'll let you guys know. Close bracket. All right, so that's really good. So we're going to talk about all of those topics, and we definitely want to add a few other things onto that. So the first thing that I want to comment on is I sent you guys an email with a list, right, of most important current think tanks and news sources on foreign policy, right? So it was The Economist, the Council on Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, and you guys went there, and I went there, and you were looking for Latvia and Googling Latvia, and there's nothing, right? So what does that tell you? Latvia is a small country, territorially, in terms of its population, but currently also in terms of foreign policy, right? So the rest of the world's not really that much concerned with Latvia. The beauty of modern United Nations, though, is that doesn't matter for us, right? In modern United Nations, there is no bad country, there's only bad delegates, right? So our challenge is to get a country that in the real world is not really much out there and be a star in a conference. I want all of you leading in your working groups, in your committees, and helping organize and lead in the multilateral negotiations of the resolutions you'll be working with. All right? And that's how you know you did well in the conference, is when you got a country that theoretically is not really that much out there, not causing trouble, but also not, because we have not that much money. We have some money, but not that much money, right? So in terms of our GDP, according to the IMF, we are ranked 91 out of almost 200 countries. So our GDP is it's not the smallest, but it's not the highest. GDP per capita is slightly better. No, it is better because we have fewer people. So if you divide the amount of the pot of money that we have by the number of our population, because we have so few people, we go up to rank 51. But still, right, so we're not super wealthy, we're not super strong militarily, but that is all okay. And what I want for us to do is to make sure that we all get there with really good diplomatic skills and lead our groups, okay? And that's how we know we did really well in this conference. Now, in terms of its foreign policy, I think one of the most important, crucial aspects will, of course, have to do with the relationship of Latvia and Russia. Right? So on the one hand, as we talked about last class when we were discussing the history of the country, we all know that Latvia was under Russian dominance between 1940 and 1991. Right? So Latvia becomes forcibly integrated into as one of the Soviet republics, right? Because Russia invades it. 1991, as the Soviet Empire crumbles, falls into tiny, tiny little pieces. Not that tiny, because Russia is kind of big. Into a big and then smaller pieces. Latvia regains its independence, and this will dramatically affect its foreign policy, right? So on the one hand, another thing you want to take into consideration of that foreign policy is not only the past relationship with Russia, but also its current relationship with Russia. That is, what is it that Russia has been doing lately, right? So here we have a case of a invasion, a military invasion, right, and a case of a forcible annexation into the Soviet Union. And then they break free, and so you're no longer under the military thumb of Russia. But what is it that Russia is doing after this period in time, right? So especially during the 2000s, and after that, and even recently, 2010, 2011, 2014, and so on. So Russia kind of becomes this big bully in its former republics, right? So you guys heard of Russian conflicts in Georgia, and of course, in Ukraine, right? So this is the latest with the forcible reannexation of the Crimea, right? So this is just really a few years ago, right? So we have Russia's intervention in Georgia saying that they are looking for terrorist groups and trying to manipulate the Georgian government. You have Russia's reannexation of the Crimea, and this is still a very hot topic. And then after that, you have, and that of course does affect Latvia, Russians' interference in the US elections, right? So all the robots and all manipulating and fake news and all of that. So all of this signifies that Russia is a really big threat to tiny little Latvia, right? So you have that big giant Russia right there at its border, and there you are, tiny Latvia with no military. I mean, tiny, minuscule military, which means pretty much nothing, right? Not that much money, not that big of a military, right there at the border, right? And not only you're at the border, Russia already invaded another independent sovereign country, Ukraine, and took a chunk of it. And remember that when Russia annexes Crimea back, so when Russia invades Ukraine, and literally takes a chunk of its territory, the Crimea, and says this is now part of Russia again. Russia does so because it says, if you look at the population of Crimea, they have lots of ethnic Russians that live there. It's very similar to what we have in Latvia, right? So because during this time, when Russia is annexing all of those republics into the Soviet Union, lots of what happens during those decades is that migration of ethnic Russians to all those countries, right, to put Russians in those countries' governments. And now you have this population that are ethnic Russians that have lived in those countries for a while, and that's a significant population. We're about, well, like 25% or so. In Latvia, it's like a quarter of the people. Like ethnic Russia. And now Russia invades for a sovereign country, the Ukraine, and says Crimea is ours because, oh, look at all this ethnic, it used to be ours back in the day, and now look at all these ethnic Russians living here. And what do you think that makes Latvia feels like? Like, oh crap, like we could be next in line. So you see how Russia is a very serious and hot issue for Latvia. Now, one of the things that we talked about last class is the influence of Latvia's domestic politics into Latvia's foreign policy, especially in the context of the last parliamentary elections, right? And what we found out when you guys are doing your research papers is that in Latvia we have a parliamentary system, right? So parliament. And if you have a parliamentary system, then we have a president and we have a prime minister, all right? And then we also realized that the political party that gained the most votes in the last elections for the parliament, right? That political party was the Harmony Party, and that was a pro-Russian party, all right? And this is really recent, right? So this is October of last year. Now, where does that put us? Does that mean that all of this change? Like, does that mean that we're no longer afraid of Russia? Is that what it means? And after doing some digging into it, I found out that no, that's not what it means for a number of reasons, right? So despite the fact that you have this pro-Russian party that won most of the votes, but not close to a majority, right? It was like 23% of the vote, or 23 seats in the parliament. 23 seats in the parliament, right? So almost a quarter of the parliament, but not even close to a majority. And we have 6 main political parties no party can govern or rule the parliament by itself, right? That means that first, there are two things that are important for us. That those parties need to make a coalition. That's the one thing that's important for us. The second thing that is important for us is who becomes the prime minister. And according to the political system of Latvia, according to the rules, the prime minister is chosen by the president, right? So president chooses prime minister. And the president can choose the prime minister from any political party he or she so desires. So in lots of other parliamentary countries, usually the prime minister is going to come from the party that has the majority in the parliament. Interestingly, in Latvia, even if a party has a majority in the parliament, that doesn't matter because the president can choose whoever he wants for prime minister. And usually, historically, the president has chosen prime ministers that have the ability to establish a stable ruling coalition. Right? Now, what happens with the harmony thing? As I was doing some research in the domestic politics of Latvia, most commentators on that and academics on that argue that even though this party got most of the seats, most of the votes, it's not a party that other parties are willing to work with, right? So it's a party that has very low chances of being part of a ruling coalition because no one wants them to rule with them, right? And you're going to talk soon about why is that. So despite the fact that you have most of the seats in the parliament coming from a pro-Russian party, that doesn't mean that our foreign policy now becomes pro-Russian, right? Our foreign policy continues to be anti-Russian because our current president is still from an anti-Russian party, right? So remember we talked about that last class. And the president chooses whoever they desire. And it's all a matter, it's all a function of the coalition, not so much of which party has the most votes. Does that make sense? You see the beauty of this? So in terms of our foreign policy, what we are going to do is to continue to craft our foreign policy in terms of this anti-Russian or caution against Russia stance. When I say anti-Russian, the most significant aspect in which you're cautious about Russia is in what regards, you see right here, security, right? The security situation. Because it is true that we do still have lots of trade with Russia that we don't necessarily want to be disturbed, but in terms of security, by which I mean like the existence of our country as a sovereign nation, like the fact that our country is not invaded, right, by a foreign power, like this will matter a lot. We know that this matters a lot because there are some documents that are super cool that I found online, and I'm not sure if you guys encountered that or not, but one of them, this is the latest report that we have, is an annual report on accomplishments and further work with respect to national foreign policy and the European Union. So in the Latvian Foreign Affairs webpage, in the official Latvian webpage, the webpage of the country, they have, so this is the latest one, and they have for past years. Right? So every year the government issues a document commenting on what are the most important topics. Right? So, and out of this document, there is a list of topics that from this official source, we know for sure this really matters for us. And because we don't expect our foreign policy to change, we will continue to follow that. Does that make sense? So there is this official report on our foreign policy. If you guys like, I can email this one to you guys. But it is online. And then there is also this other cool thing that I found, a statement by the President of Latvia at the United Nations. The last statement available, right? And this is, I think, the 2016. Yes, this is 2016, but it's the last available. And because the President has not changed, and the President chooses the Prime Minister chooses the cabinet members, and politics is decided by a coalition, not just by the winner, right? We don't expect those things to change. But just so that you know how important that is, look at what he says. All people have the right to live in peace and security in their own country. What is he talking about? Dang, Russia. He's talking about Russia, like, this is a clear statement. Like, don't invade us. Like, all countries have the right to live in peace and security. So this is something like it's the very first sentence of the document, right? So you can see that this really matters for us, right? Another way in which this anti-Russian stance plays out also has to do what happens when we regain our independence in 1991. Right, so as Sajin was pointing out, after we regain our independence in 1991, what Latvia does is to get its relations closer to Western powers, closer to European countries and NATO countries, right? So something that is going to be really important, especially like when you read this document, especially, and when you read other things about our foreign policy, there is a number of themes that you want to keep in mind that are going to guide our foreign policy. All right, so one of them, I think this is working. I'm going to put them here. Number one, institutions. By institutions, I mean here international institutions, or international, and here we're going to use it interchangeably, organizations. When you take IR, you're going to learn those things are slightly different. Institutions, right? Together with institutions, keywords for us: cooperation, multilateralism, diplomacy, I'm going to put down here as a subtopic democracy, human rights. You're going to like this. If I'm talking about democracy and human rights, I'm also talking about individual freedom. This is really cool. Freedom of the press. Civil society participation. And you're thinking about, oh, this is it, gender equality. Right, so when you read through the official documents, right, that report that I showed you, official speeches by the president of our country or of our ministers, those are topics, some of the topics that will come out and that will help guide and inform our foreign policy, right? So as a tiny little country with a small population, not that much money, and no military, how do we get what we want, right? So how do we get things going? Because if you're a big power, if you're Russia, or even if you're the United States, at the end of the day, you threaten them with your weapons, right? So that's basic power politics. It's basics, international relations, ever since we have nations. Like back in the Bible. You have people going to war against other people. It's right there. So you go read the classics. Go read Thucydides. The War of the Peloponnesian. The whole entire book's about that. So if you're a big power, that's what you do, right? If you have lots of money, you can bribe them, right? China, big power and lots of money. Bribing people here and there. Here's some, the U.S. does that all the time. So here's some assistance. Get this assistance money for development. But then you vote as I tell you to vote. Right, but anywhere this tiny, like what can you do? You cannot do things by yourself, right? Because you have no people to put in an army, no army, and you have no money. right? So what do you rely on? You rely on your participation in those international institutions or international organizations, right? So that proximity with the West, right? That proximity with the West will mean a few things. Of course, as you were out of the Soviet sphere, not necessarily out geographically, but out of the Soviet Union after it crumbles, your westernization will mean an impact on your form of government, right? So if before you existed as a dictatorship, now you exist as a democracy, you embrace democratic values, right? So that's what Western democracies, Western powers are all about. They're about democracy. And if you're about democracy as a form of government, you are about respect for human rights, respect for individual freedoms, respect for freedom of the press, respect for your civil society, and the expectation that your civil society will participate in your government and even in voicing their preferences for foreign policy. You are also going to favor things like gender equality, right? So when you consider your committee topics, these are all things, if you have to think which direction I should take in terms of making a suggestion to solve a problem, those are all principles that should inform your policy suggestion. All right? So an embrace for democratic values and norms, an embrace of human rights, an embrace of individual freedoms, right? So an embrace of all those things, they will really matter for us. On the other hand, the other thing that really matters for us is an affirmation of multilateralism, right? So in their foreign relations, countries can pursue their interests either through bilateral negotiations, that is a negotiation with one country and another country, just the two of them, and hence the term bilateral. We also call that intergovernmental relations, right? So relations between government and government. And, or you can pursue your interests as pursuing diplomacy with a broader set of countries, right, in the context of an international organization. And we call that multilateralism. Like, for example, if you try to pursue your economic interests, you could pursue your economic interests of, let's say, having more trade with another country, either by having bilateral trade agreements with country, another country, another country. So you have several different agreements country by country, or you could try to increase your market and increase your trade by doing it multilaterally, right? Once you join the World Trade Organization, for example, right? The WTO. So the WTO sets up rules for opening your markets that are multilateral. So you're negotiating with all the countries at the same time instead of just doing bilateral agreements, right? Now, if you are a big country such as the United States or Russia, yeah, you kind of like bilateralism because that means you're dealing with another country. They'll necessarily be weaker than you are, right? And that means you can kind of force them into doing things that they would otherwise not do because you have this thing called power. You're much bigger, much wealthier than they are. You're in a better position to impose your terms. But if you are a smaller country, you actually prefer multilateralism, right? Because you then can join with other smaller countries that are as small or smaller than you are. You can join forces with them, right? And then you can pressure, try to get better terms from bigger countries. Right? Does that make sense? So for us, multilateralism is also going to be a big principle informing our foreign policy. So if, for example, we're dealing with an issue of disarmament or an issue of dealing with terrorists or whatever, an issue of dealing with illegal immigration or whatever topic we're going to be dealing, our recommendations will always be that solutions to those problems be crafted multilaterally, that is, within and by international institutions, rather than allowing countries to dictate how those things are going to be dealt unilaterally or even bilaterally. Does that make sense? So that's another big important principle for us, and that's why cooperation matters, diplomacy matters, right? Does that make sense? Questions thus far?
Isn't there anything that, like international law that prevents people from, like countries like Russia from annexing countries like Ukraine?
Oh goodness. Okay, you're taking comparative, you're not taking IR. Okay, you'll take IR in the fall, and we're going to talk more about that. Isn't there international law that prevents countries like Russia from invading another country, like Ukraine, and grabbing a piece of its territory, Crimea? Yes, it's the United Nations Charter, which is in my office. The beautiful blue book, beautiful with the little, the little leaves things, crown leaves things. Yes, it does. It's illegal. Now, despite the fact that it is illegal, if you think about all the nations in the world, all the countries in the world, all those countries are what we call sovereign, right? To be a sovereign means that there is no higher authority upon you. Despite the fact that some people say, I always cringe at it, I always cringe. The UN is a world government. Oh my gosh, I just want to die. The UN is not a world government, okay? Because the UN doesn't govern any countries. The UN is a form of, right here, there's a distinction. Governance, which means how we govern ourselves, right? How we organize our relations, which doesn't necessarily require any hierarchy. When you're talking about government, right? Oh, I just saw the American government today. Most of you must have seen it, the social contract. Those of you who took the class with Pope, right? He does this thing right here. Those are the individuals, doesn't he? And then he says the individuals enter a social contract. See, this is the social contract. And they establish a sovereign above them. Is that? See? I know. Doesn't it make your heart so happy? It makes my heart happy, like very happy. You see, hierarchy. The UN is not a world government because the UN has no sovereign powers over anyone. In fact, the UN is, think about it as an association of countries that are sovereign themselves. And if they're sovereign themselves, they do what they want. Right? So when you take IR, I'm going to make you read a little bit of Thucydides. And Thucydides is really, okay, it's sad, but it's cool. Cool sentence, or cool phrase that says, you must have heard it maybe at some point in your lives. The strong do what they want, and the weak do what they must. Right? That's international relations. The strong do whatever they want because who's going to stop them? Remember when we took American government, right? And then you learn about that thing called the state of nature? What is the state of nature? No government, right? It's anarchy. That's international relations. International relations is how countries relate to each other and pursue what they want in the state of nature. Right? Now, whether this is state of nature nowadays or in the past is closer to Hobbes' vision, poor, nass, brutish, and short, that's the life of man or of the states, or whether it's closer to Locke or Rousseau, no, it's not that bad. Countries can get along. Or whether it's a mix, that's up to debate. Right? But the point is, in the state of nature, no one bosses over you. In the state of nature, you do whatever you want. Right? In the state of nature, if you're Russia and you have a big military and you bring your troops and you put them in Ukraine and you take Crimea up to yourself, who's going to stop you? It doesn't matter. Like the law is only upheld so much to the extent that there is someone interested in upholding the law. And if no one is interested in upholding the law, oh, sorry, buddy. Right? Really. That's really what happened. Like, that's what the international community is doing right now when they look at Crimeans. Sorry, buddy. That really sucks. I can't imagine. Actually, I can. But, you see? So that's a very tricky part of international relations, which at some point you will take international law with me. And when you take international law with me, one of the things that you're going to learn is that we have different types of international law. right? So this work that we're doing at this conference, that we're working towards writing a resolution, right? So the United Nations writes resolutions. Some bodies of the UN write reports. So we have reports, we have resolutions, and all of that is part of international law. And the problem with international law is that even though it highlights important norms and principles, things that we would like to happen, the vast majority of it is non-binding, right? So everything that comes out of the General Assembly, we have 3 of you here in General Assembly committees, right? In the General Assembly, in the form of a resolution, it's non-binding. It means that it is a suggestion of what countries should do, but no one can force them to do it. All right? The only pieces of law that come out of the UN that are binding, that have tooth, that's how we call it, is what comes out of the Security Council. But the Security Council cannot deal with everything. The Security Council only deals with some things that are related to international security. Not even international security in general, because that's what the GA1 does, right? With the threat of impending war. Does that make sense? So, yeah, is that illegal? Yeah, it's totally illegal. Can anyone do something about it? It depends. Does anyone want to do something about it? Right? Sometimes the interests of countries will cause them to go and defend Kosovo, right? To go and set up a no-fly zone over countries in the Middle East or North Africa when they're in trouble, right? To protect certain interests. But then there's really people send people to Sudan? No, not really. To protect Latvia? To protect the Crimea? And then another thing I want to take into consideration, right, that we're going to talk about, that you're making me teach my Tuesday class in advance. But when you look at the UN, have you guys heard of what we call the 5 permanent countries? So the way the UN is organized is the vast majority of countries in the world are members, right? So 194. All right, Sujing, things you cannot write. There are countless numbers of countries in the world. No, they can be counted. They're counted to 194. But you get a pass. That was like my first comment. Like, no, you actually can't count them. There's 194 at the UN, and that's going to matter for us when you're going to talk about majority. Right? So the history of the UN is that it's an institution that comes out of the Second World War, right? And the victorious in the war are the ones that set up the institution with the goal of preventing further future wars, right? So who comes victorious in the war? Of course, the United States. Back then, Russia, who was aligned with the United States. Great Britain following, right behind the United States because of all the money help that you guys gave them. France, because Great Britain insisted, right? Because Roosevelt was like, France? Like, really? But Britain, the church was like, no, really, France, bring them in. And China, right? So all of those countries are what are called the P5. They're the 5 countries that have a permanent seat in the Security Council. Remember that the Security Council is the only body that can actually make law that has tooth. And it has tooth because they command the troops made out of volunteers from the UN. And then the Security Council has those 5 permanent members and 5 and 10 other members, not 5, 10 other members that rotate every 2 years, to a total of 15 members, all right? So 10 that rotate and 5 permanent, right? Russia is what? A permanent member of the UN. Anything that means that having a P5 status means that you have the power to veto anything that comes out of the Security Council. So even if you say, oh, the UN should do something about Russia invading Crimea because that was totally illegal. It's written right there in the blue book that you cannot do it. They've done it. What's the UN do about it? Nothing, because everything that goes to the Security Council that goes against Russian interests, they can veto. It's the same thing for America. right? The same thing for China and Great Britain and France. Does that make sense? That's why it doesn't quite work like that. It was a long answer, but now I hope you understand a little bit more of how it works.
Is it possible for like the UN or the Security Council to say that even a P5 member can get kicked out of P5?
They can be what?
Like kicked out of it.
No, they can't be kicked out of it, right? Because that would need a reform of the UN Charter. And they can veto a reform. I mean, for the UN Charter, there has been lots of pressure for many decades now for a change in how the Security Council works. Because there has been, well, but there are other countries that grew economically, like Germany. Why doesn't Germany have a permanent seat? Why doesn't you have other countries from other parts of the world, Nigeria or Brazil, why don't they have a permanent seat as well? Right? So there has been pressure to change it. But no one that has the veto power wants to give it up. Right? So you would need to renegotiate the whole institution. And that's so much work and involves so many pieces that it's just not going to happen. Does that make sense? So this is my very long answer to that one question. Other things that I want for us to keep in mind. So on the one hand, this anti-Russia stance or this apprehension or concern with Russia because of security implications. We talked about proximity with the West. Even though Brexit is a thing, there has been an inclination towards making sure that we still maintain our trade relationships with Great Britain, because Great Britain, as you saw yesterday, is an important trading partner, right, of Latvia. So even though they're getting out of the EU, we want to make sure that our relationships with Great Britain continue to be stable. Part of that movement towards the West and part of that emphasis on institutions means that we rely on institutions a lot to pursue what they want. So we are part, of course, of the European Union, right? We are part of NATO. Does everyone know what the NATO is? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Can you guys believe that Argentina once asked to be a part of NATO? And you're like, you guys are stupid. It's North Atlantic, dude. North Atlantic. You are South Atlantic. You can't be part of, that's just me making fun of them. I mean, we do like their dulce de leche, it's really good. But yes, we make fun of them all the time. No, dude, you can't be part of NATO. Like, just no. All right, we are part of the IMF, the WTO, the World Bank. Okay, so all of these are multilateral, of course, of the UN, are multilateral institutions, right? So they are institutions that put together, bring together a wide number of countries in the world. Okay, so when we're talking about European Union, there are a few areas there that really matters for us, right? So we love the European Union because of trade, right? Trade makes countries wealthier. Countries like to be wealthier because with more money, you buy more weapons and you're safe. Or with more money, you pay for more social security programs and your people are happier. Or you do a mix of both, right? But generally, countries like more money. Just like as you guys like more money, right? It's not that different. So we like the EU because of trade. You know that the NATO is a security institution, right? So NATO is created in the aftermath of the Second World War, and NATO comes, so remember that during the Second World War, Russia is initially a partner, like part of the Allies, and so much that everyone is seeing that Stalin has no good thing in him. Churchill saw it coming. He tried to tell Roosevelt. Roosevelt said, no, he's a fine guy. Let's bring him to the UN and give him veto power. And Churchill was like, oh my gosh, I'm the only voice of reason here. Stupid Roosevelt won't quite listen. But sure, let's bring France in. But at the end of the day, so America's not really seeing it coming. By 46, 47, right? So the UN comes out in 45. By 46, 47, you kind of start to see Russia spreading its wings in parts of Europe, right? So we have a crisis in Iran, crisis in Turkey, crisis in Greece. It's like, that's getting too close to Western Europe. We don't like this. Iran has oil. And you have like the beginnings of the Cold War, right? And then as there is the sense of the emergence of the Cold War, NATO comes out together following the Marshall Plan. Remember the Marshall Plan, your basic world history. NATO comes out as a means to defend Western Europe from the Soviet Union, okay? So with that, there was lots of discussion. So after the Soviet Union falls in 1991, there were lots of discussions on what happens with NATO. Because the primary purpose of NATO has always been, or had always been, to defend Western Europe from encroachments from the Soviet Union. But now the Soviet Union is no longer. What do we do with Russia? Is Russia a threat? Is Russia not a threat? You have those, 10 to 20 years of interregnum, not really see what's going on. And then you have Russia, especially with Putin, right? So when Putin comes to power, then really becoming more and more aggressive and becoming more and more of a bully regionally. Right? And in a sense, then, NATO regains its purpose as a means to defend European countries. NATO also expands, right? So initially, NATO members were part of a smaller set of countries in Western Europe. And what happens is over time, NATO membership increases towards the West to the point that it now obviously literally exists at the border with Russia because, Latvia is a member. Right? And there's Russia right across the border, right? Which then, of course, makes it also a threat to Russia. But the point is, NATO really matters for Latvia because it's one of the guarantees, right, of protection against Russia. So NATO as a system of collective security, so the principle of collective security is the principle that an attack to one of the members means an attack to all of the members, right? So if one of us is attacked, all of us need to pull our forces together and defend the attacked member, right? So that's the appeal of it, and that's the appeal of it for Latvia, that would not ever be able to defend itself from Russia by itself, right? So why are we putting names of organizations here? Especially, so this will matter a lot. And these would matter a lot because these are countries we're close with. We're close to those countries. We're near them in terms of we want their help. We want to do foreign policy with them, right? So those are what we call natural allies, all right? Now, at the conference, what does that mean? We also care, obviously, about the quality of those delegates, right? So if you have a country that is a NATO member and would be a natural ally, but you go to the website and you read their position paper and you see that their position paper sucks. If their position paper sucks, it's because they did not do their research. And it means that they're only going to the conference to get drunk. And I'm not kidding, this is going to happen. We're going to talk about it. It's a sad thing. The number of drunk people, goodness gracious. By the way, which none of you will do. Like none, ever. Like it's not happening, not under my watch. I will ship you back. I am not kidding. I am a woman of my word. We go on the trip, you're still under the covenant. I don't care. You are under the covenant. And under Lee's covenant, no one, I'm having this on video. No one, it's recorded, it's on video. No one's getting drunk. No one's having sex. I don't care. I'm saying that aloud so that you don't think you misunderstood. What you do when you go back home, not my problem. What you do when you travel with me, my problem. Are we all very clear? But just so you know, people go there and they get drunk. And then they don't come to session. That's bad. So you don't want to be working with those people. Not at all. Are we clear? And you kind of can type to infer which type of student is going to be a student that will be a good delegate. They'll be committed, they'll be participating in committee, and they have done their research, and they know what they're doing, which is the type of people we want to work with once they read their position papers, once they're posted online. All right, so that's our first screening, and you're going to have more time to go over those things. We have a day, I think, just for that in our syllabus. But that's why the position papers matter so much. Right, so while we're talking about getting drunk, okay, natural allies, that's right. So what you're going to do is go over the list of countries that are members of those organizations, right? Those are the first, some of the first countries that you would try to become friends with, right? And literally, like, I'm not even kidding. So everyone that gets there, you have a placard with your country's name, and you also can have a name tag with your country's name. You can literally just go looking for name tags and say, hi, I'm the delegate of Latvia. Would you like to talk about blah, blah, blah? That's how, yeah. And that's your personal skills. I mean, I suppose like not everyone's going to be like this bubbler like me, but still just get into, hi, I'm the delegate of Latvia. You honorable delegate, where are you from? I see you're from such and such countries. You should talk about this because you have common interests. All right? That's how it works. All of these are multilateral institutions. Another natural allies for us, Baltic countries, and specifically, we have this informal regional network. Oh, I'm running out of place. I'm going to put them in here. It's kind of cool. I'm going to cheat. It's called NB8. It stands for North Baltic 8. This is an informal network, and it's formed by Denmark, Sweden, Iceland, Norway, Finland, of course us, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And we care about security and economic cooperation. Other natural allies, right? So go introduce yourself to these people if they have good position papers posted online. Now, what happens if they don't have good position papers posted online? That's also a good point. You don't really want to necessarily work with them because they're going to be, derailing your process of getting things done, but you need their signatures, right? So have them sign whatever papers you were working with. You just need their names. You just need their signatures. It's okay. You can just say, hey, I see that, look at here, we're members of the same organization, we have common interests, and I'm working with this working group, and we're working on this draft resolution to propose those things that we have in common. Please sign your name in here, right? You need names because we're talking about the UN. If you're talking about the UN, you're talking about majority rule. For a draft resolution to become a resolution, for it to be approved, you need a majority of countries to sign on that. So once you're working, once you're doing the writing, you don't want to be working with a group that's too large because poli-sci people, you've heard that. If not, you will hear that. Something called collective action problem. If you take an American government, you've heard about it. It's one of the most important concepts for everything in life, from group assignments to international relations. It works everywhere. That's the beauty of it, right? If a group is too large, you have free riders, right? You have people, normal people call them freeloaders, people that do nothing, right? They arrive late, drunk, probably not properly ready to do anything, and they only make life harder. That's what happens when groups are too large. Now, if a group is small enough, then you know who they are, right? You agree to meet at the coffee shop or whatever and get things done, or in whatever corner. you get things done, right? So your working group will start smaller, probably increase some, but at the end of the day, you need signatures. So at the end of the day, you can have someone from your working group to function as a lobbyist and go get your names, right? We'll talk more about how you should be interacting and behaving in your working groups as we go through the semester. I'm going to give you all the insider tips, but keep those things in mind. So these are people that you look for. If they're good, to work with them. If they're not so good, you want their signatures. Okay? Okay, other topics that matter for us. Oh, so you have time. Oh, good. All right, so online, easy. That's easy Wikipedia stuff. List of members of the EU, list of members of NATO. Like, these are things that you should know, right? It's at the conference, by the way, it's okay to, quote, cheat in the sense that it's okay. You should have this material with you. You can Google it, right? You're going to have your phone, so you don't need to memorize it, but you kind of want to have the information handy.
Every country is represented at the conference.
At this particular conference? Usually, yes. And that means that for all of you who are in the GA, in the General Assembly, your committees are huge. We're going to talk about strategies to operate in a huge committee. I got you, don't worry. But yes, you have, that's why I told you guys, you usually have over 5,000 students from all over the world. Right, so the conference happens in 2 hotels simultaneously. It happens in the Sheraton and in the Hilton. They're about 2 blocks apart. And you have multiple rooms going on at the same time in both hotels. Like, it's intense. So it's really cool. We're going to meet so many people. It's going to be beautiful. I'm excited. All right, questions? Other topics that matter for us. At some point, I'm going to have to start erasing things. Where are my kidding notes? Talked about this. Hot topics. Because of our Russia, anti-Russia stance, and what that means is that we would not normally work with Russia in our committee, right? So if you're going to be part of a working group, normally Russia wouldn't be part of it, right? It doesn't mean you don't want to go and be writing things like Russia sucks and they're a bully. Like, don't write those things, okay, in your draft resolutions. Don't do that's not diplomatic, right? But what I'm saying is being anti-Russian for us means that we'll always be concerned about security. We'll always be concerned about affirming countries' sovereignties, affirming their territorial borders, right? Being against invasion, right? So this is the language that we use. We don't say, Russia, you suck and we hate you. We say, we believe that all countries have the right to live in peace and to exist amongst nations that are sovereign in the world, and that everyone should have their territories respected. And you smile in the end. You see? That's the same thing as saying, we hate you, Russia. But you just say it so much nicely. Does that make sense? There you go. Other things that matter for us. All right. Something that's being big right now because of Russia's influence in U.S. elections, besides security, cybersecurity. All right, so let me see if, does any of you have that in your committee? Yeah, so whoever is in the, that's Tammy and Blaine in the C34, right? So you have a topic of improving the use of technology in peacekeeping operations, so that involves some security. Oh yeah, GA1, that's Ron. Developments in the field of information and telecommunications in the context of international security. That's cybersecurity, right? And we care a lot about it It's a term that comes up a lot in our official documents. That we're really concerned because, hey, if Russia did that against the greatest nation in the world, poor us, right? For them to infiltrate, not that they put too much effort in that because it's Latvia, it's this big. You can just send your troops across the border. But it's something that we care about, right? So coming up with means to make countries more secure against cyber attacks, right? So this is a big topic for us. Something else that we all agree and we care about climate policy and the Paris Climate Agreement, right? So this is not something that we're against of, it's something that we're in favor of, right? So dealing with global warming and topics likewise. So those are things that are important for us. We care about, of course, we care about security. We care about border policy. We care about terrorism. That's another big item in our agenda, especially in what our government calls hybrid threats or hybrid war, when terrorists utilize both military and non-military means, and by non-military sometimes we're talking again about disinformation in cybersecurity, force and other things to destabilize countries, right? So we are concerned with Russia in that regard, we're concerned with terrorists in that regard, that really matters for us. And another reason that we really, really like the EU, besides trade, right? We love the EU. We want the EU to continue to be a big force in the world because we love free trade, because it makes us wealthier. Another thing that the EU has been doing for us is improvements in what regards, we talked about that the other day, energy security. Right, energy security, and they also have been helping us with transportation, which also helps with trade, right? So energy security and transportation are also things that we care about. Why do we want to have energy security? Because we want to become less dependent on Russia, right? Energy security helps you not be bullied as much, right? And finally, there is another topic that's going to matter a whole lot for the United Nations Refugees, Human Rights and Refugees Committee, that's Sujin, with the issue of illegal immigration. That's the two M's. And just migration in general. Right, so on the one hand, we do have a diaspora of Latvians living around the world, and we care a lot about them. It's everywhere in our policy documents, making sure that our diaspora are doing okay, making sure that they're being protected, whatever they are, right? So there is a concern in migration, but we are also really anti-illegal immigration, especially in the context of the European Union, especially also in the context of the refugee crisis in Europe, right? Because see what happens, we're part of the European Union. If the EU enters in crisis, we enter in crisis, right? So if bad things happen to the EU, bad things happen to us. Like that's what interdependence means. We're interdependent, with another IR term, with the EU. So because of that, we're going to have a concern with human, democratic, respecting of people's freedoms ways of addressing the issue of illegal immigration, right? And of addressing issues of migration in general. Those are also topics that are important for us, right? So on the one hand, we don't have any necessarily anti-immigrant sort of rhetoric, right? Although we also have a problem with forced migration. So remember what happened here. Lots of ethnic Russians migrated to our country, right? And now they are almost a quarter of the population, right? So migration matters, even almost in the sense of like a security threat a little bit. Illegal immigration matters. So those are topics that are going to come up, and you want to be very thoughtful about it. So on the one hand, never affirm illegal immigration, but on the other hand, because of our commitments to democracy and to individual freedoms and to human rights, to attempt to deal with it in the most human and peaceful way as possible. Does that make sense? Questions? What? For? Threats? T-H-R-E-A-T-S. This is war. Questions? Emotion, blah, 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 talk about all of this. Okay. We're all very good. We all know what we're doing. Questions about the conference, anything related that you have thus far?
So we probably talk about this later. How many people in like group is a good thing? Like how many people like this? How many? Okay. What size is a good size? How many people?
Try to start out with maybe around 12. At some point it's going to grow to 20. Yeah, try to keep it more or less like that. So this is how it works. So you're going to have tons of people in your committees, right? And of course, you cannot have 194 people working together. That's just unfeasible. So you're going to break down into groups. And each group, we'll call them a working group, right? Each working group will be working together, will be working within their group to draft what we call it starts as a working paper, right? So that's the first version of the document we're writing, is a working paper. The working paper, once it's submitted to the dais, becomes a draft resolution. And a draft resolution, once voted and approved, becomes a resolution. That's your goal, right? So when you're working your working paper, you're going to be bringing the ideas that you have to solve a problem with the ideas that other people in your group have. And you're going to put those ideas together into a single document. All right? And that's why in this class you're going to learn the format and how to write said document. Right? Not only that, you're going to bring your computers, you're going to bring your power cords, and you're going to bring extension cables. Extension cables are key. Because if you have the computer and you're the one doing the typing, it means that you control what gets in and what gets out of the document. And you can do that because I'm teaching you how to write the document, so no one has to do it for you. If you control what gets into the document, it means that for sure you're going to put your policy in the document because you're writing it. And also, you can help other delegates with the language of their policies into the document so that their policies don't conflict with your policy. Right? That's why you're bringing your computer, you're bringing your cables, and you're bringing your extension cables. Like the little where people hook up. It sounds so silly, but it makes a big difference. It really does. So you're going to be writing with those people, and you're going to review your position papers. You're going to say, here is this idea, what do you guys think? And when they have their ideas, part of what you can do is to help them. Sometimes they have a good idea, but it doesn't sound quite right. So you can help them craft the language so that it sounds good when it's in the document, right? And you don't necessarily, maybe don't want to be the one doing it, but at some point, someone from your group is going to be doing lobbying, which is It's going to be going from person to person saying, hey, I need your signature, because you're going to need signatures. All right? So this is more or less how it works during the day. Now, does anyone, here's the syllabus. For next class, we have, here it is. On Moodle, there is a video. Okay? On Moodle, there is a video. I want you to watch the video before you come to class. All right? Watch the video before you come to class so that it can speed up our process. All right? So instead of just watching your favorite show, Netflix tonight, just watch the video and you're going to see this very good-looking professor with this adorable accent talking to you about the UN. Okay? It's going to be utterly entertaining. I promise. So watch the video, and then next class we're going to talk about the structure of the UN. We're going to talk a little bit about it today, and you're going to talk about writing a position paper. Here you have a list of documents. Download them, have them in your computers, just have them. The shorter ones, read through them. The longer ones, skim through them. Especially if it's a document that pertains to your committee, you should read. If it's a document, I mean, everyone reads the UN Charter, the things that I noted. If it's a document that doesn't pertain to your committee, skim it, okay? Because this is existing international law that you need to be acquainted with, all right? And the most important thing that I want to do next class is how to write a position paper, because that's like the crucial thing of this class. Okie dokie, beautiful people. Gorgeous delegation. Go in peace. Have a beautiful day. You have lots of time to do homework, Sam, so go enjoy it. You might even have time just to watch Netflix. Just cause. Oh my goodness, what a good life.